Go ahead and get started then.
Sure.
Well, welcome to Montana MGMA members and guests. For those that don't know me, I'm Katie Yakowicz, the Executive Director here at Montana MGMA, and we are excited to offer this two-part webinar on cybersecurity sponsored by UMIA. Today we have Conor Smith from First Call Computer Solutions with us. Conor is a fourth generation Montanan. He is a veteran of high-tech sectors in Montana and beyond. His team of over 30 IT professionals helps small and medium-sized organizations implement practical yet informative IT voice and web solutions. First Call is based in Missoula with offices throughout Montana. Just a couple reminders before we get started. If you're not speaking, please remember to mute yourself. There will be a question and answer time at the end. And also this webinar does count for live CEU credits if you are looking for those. Without further ado, Conor, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Think I got some feedback there. Okay, how's that? There we go. So Katie, thank you. Thanks, to attendees, and I decided to interject a little bit of humor into today's presentation for a couple of reasons. As we all know, 2020 has been an especially long year. And that is absolutely true for folks within the medical field. And we all know that cybersecurity is not exactly a light, delightful topic. It's fairly heavy and complex. But I want people to walk away from this with a smile, but also with a critical key takeaway. And that is that security hardening isn't tough. Hopefully you get the joke there. Katie introduced me, and just a couple of more things. So I'm a 20-year IT veteran. I've got 35 very smart people around me that help me manage IT for a wide variety of organizations. In the medical field, we work with community health centers, rural access hospitals. In some cases, we are their IT department. In other cases, we partner with their IT department at what's called a co-managed approach. We've got private practices, dental practices, chiropractic practices, orthopedic, and again, everything, from there all the way up to, full-blown 24/7, 365 hospitals. This graphic here is important to help you understand, because when people are talking, professionals within the IT world or the cybersecurity world, it really matters what space that they play in terms of overall risk management. And so specifically to First Call, we work in the regulatory space. And what I mean by that is we're not the organization that is setting standards, those types of things, policy. We're also not in the verification world specifically or primarily. We primarily are in your world, in the operation, doing the work. Implementing technology, tools, processes, behaviors that help manage risk, and in the event of an incident or an event, helping organizations recover from that. So that's really the role that First Call plays as we kind of walk through cybersecurity and risk management. I also want to frame up this notion of managed IT versus managed security services. And it's very important that people begin to kind of reframe their thinking. And please know, when I say managed IT versus managed security, that doesn't necessarily mean that you outsource IT or you have in-house IT. It just means somebody is managing it. So let's take a look and make sure that we kind of create some distinctions here. So managed IT is what we have all, primarily lived with for the last, 20, 30 years. When we think about that, we think about those are the folks that fix our IT issues. There's kind of a standard set of risks that all organizations face, and they help us manage that. They improve our infrastructure, our tools. They may be helping us boost our operations by using those tools better. They're accountable for staying on budget. So success for managed IT, again, whether it's in-house, outsourced, or some combination thereof, is usually tech tool based. It means fewer issues, less fundamental risks, and getting alignment technically, operationally, and fiscally. Managed security is different. Typically, they're focused on understanding regulatory compliance, industry-specific threats, what the impact of those threats and risks might be. They're implementing auditing, alignment, and other types of controls. But this is the real thing that to help people understand. Success for managed security services is risk-based, not tech tools based. It's identifying, closing, and maintaining security gaps. It's the ability to recover and, if necessary, to provide compliance reporting. This is an illustration, to help reemphasize the same point, because it's a very important point. So up here, you've got the bathroom. You've got managed IT, and again, just think about that. It's the tools for the job, when they are needed, where they are needed. It's that Captain Obvious type of protections that need to exist. When you think about managed security services, you want to be thinking behind the scenes, the plumbing, the systems, the connections, the supply chain. You want to be thinking internet, application vendors, phone system, phone carrier, lots and lots of underlying technologies, connections, rights, access, etc. So managed security services is identifying risk in those environments, doing protections to address the risks responsibly, enabling IT to detect events and incidents, respond to events and incidents, and recover from events and incidents. And again, when you're thinking managed security, don't just think up here in the bathroom. Be thinking about all of the underlying systems and connections. And hopefully that's helpful to people in terms of breaking those things up within your mind. All right, this question, is there an issue? So cybersecurity, there is an issue. There's a large issue for organizations with 150 and fewer employees right now. If a breach happens, the costs are very significant, and typically there's not a mature set of cybersecurity tools to detect, respond, and recover, to that. Okay, so I think most people now, especially with the news headlines, and I don't want to get into fear mongering and a lot of the statistics that people throw around as they're trying to market services, would agree that there is an issue with cybersecurity and protection right now. So I don't think that's in question. What is in question, and part of what I hope this presentation helps people through, is that many organizations, many business leaders, people in your seats are defining the issue as too complex, too technical, and too expensive. So the reality is, threat is real. I think we can agree on that. It's happening, to Montana organizations, business, schools, academic, medical, etc. The number of incidents that we hear about is much higher than what's reported. There are very sensible protections that organizations need. There's also some advanced things that organizations need to be thinking about, and that's true in the medical field. And then, also is people, do make mistakes, have careless behavior, and those mistakes, can, certainly impact an organization. So if we agree there is an issue, we're certainly seeing across the American landscape that we're not dealing very well with the issue. And typically you have to ask the question, of what's, why? And one way of framing that is this question of what's holding our leaders back? And I think the basic answer for that in 2020 is just a wonderful, visceral, uh, response to that is there's been a lot of other pressing priorities. Leaders have their hands full, and especially you folks in the medical administration world, trying to manage strategy, finance, operations, health risks to your people, to your patients. It's just been an incredibly challenging year. And even without the pandemic, there's just a lot of different things that people are trying to manage and risk. So I really think part of it is we're focused on other things, but another really large part of the problem is that they haven't taken the time to adequately measure the risk. And they're again kind of stuck in this, I'm hoping, I'm trusting, nothing bad has happened in the past, seems what we're doing is working, just steady as she goes. So one of my, core parts of this presentation is to really encourage leaders to take a small amount of time to assess the risk. Many of you might be sitting there thinking, okay, do a risk assessment. Those could be very expensive. So here's my first security hardening isn't tough tip. Do an executive level risk assessment. Gather your team, get a qualified third party, and run through one. And when I say executive level risk assessment, this is not going to meet, the HIPAA security compliance rule. What I'm talking about is an hour and a half, running through 50 questions. Through that exercise, you will better understand the landscape as it sits today, what vision and action you can take around it. 50 questions is plenty. You start diving into full risk assessments with leadership teams, it's much too much. Again, the goal here is 50 questions, an hour and a half to help people better understand their risks and set a course, to address them. There's also this question about, well, why do it with a third party, someone like me, or there's many other qualified companies as part of this association, or do a Google search. The reason that I highly recommend that you do it live and do it with a third party is when you start to dive into those questions, you really start to get confused. The rules can be confusing. It can be kind of very academic in nature. A third-party person can help make it more tangible, realistic, and actionable, based off of what we're doing within other clients to address this. Okay. Another really important question to get answered is, all right, what's holding the leaders back, but what's holding traditional IT back? And over there on the left, I've got some more, plumbing imagery. And if everybody in this seat that deals with IT people, whether it's inside their organization or outside, certainly has a perspective that IT's got a lot on their plate too. And usually doesn't have a tremendous amount of capacity because they're busy handling the day-to-day operations or making things flexible through this pandemic and all of that kind of stuff. So definitely capacity is an issue. Cybersecurity is also a different focus. As I mentioned before, traditional IT is tools, operations, making users happy. Security IT is managing risk, identifying, closing, maintaining gaps. They're two different focuses. They're two different sets of skills. So please do understand that cybersecurity is really a specialty focus. Capacity is an issue. Another thing to keep in mind is oftentimes IT people don't like asking for more money. They want to feel like I'm doing the job, I'm doing it cost effectively. and asking for more money is a bad thing. They're thinking dollars expense versus what could this really cost us if something happened. Um, Soft skills. Many of the issues with cybersecurity aren't as much technical as they are behavioral. And so many IT people don't have some of those soft skills that are needed to help change behavior. They may also not be empowered to help change that behavior. Okay. Last question I posed here is, why are banks successful? And this is a very important question, because what you don't hear going on in cybersecurity world is a bunch of banks being breached. You hear about the government. You hear about medical institutions, you hear about school systems, you hear about municipalities, but you don't hear a lot about banks being brought to their knees by ransomware, or their customers' data, being financial data being infiltrated, or those types of things. And the answer to the question is that banks, for a long, long time, decades, have separated traditional IT from cybersecurity. They have a whole group that's decades mature of cybersecurity analysts, cybersecurity assessment procedures, cybersecurity standards, actual auditing that happens multiple times a year. They already have the maturity around this. And so to answer this question of what's holding traditional IT back, it's they don't have that maturity from the leadership to operations to what's available in the market that, say, the banking industry does. And if you're wondering where things are going to help deal with this problem, look to a proven model, and what banking has already been doing, for a long time now. So here's my next security hardening isn't tough tip. Organizations, small, medium, and large, are going to have to rely on outsourcing. And you might think this is an overt sales pitch from a guy like me that does cybersecurity outsourcing as a service, but it's really not. I'm trying to help folks in your seat understand that you've really got to get more shoulders involved. You're not large enough to hire these people internally, build the systems, build the processes, build the tools. And going back to what I was saying earlier, your traditional IT function isn't very well equipped to do these things, or they would have done them. The other thing I want to recommend is synergy, not a la carte. Oftentimes when we go into organizations and we start doing cybersecurity assessments, they've got this firewall, this antivirus, this tool, that tool. And what has happened is as they've run into specific issues, I need a better backup. They've solved that without thinking about the broader picture. I need a firewall, or I need a VPN connection. They've solved that without thinking about the broader issue. It's as I've seen a problem, I've gone to the counter, I've picked up what I've needed, I've put it in place. That's the a la carte approach. That becomes very difficult to manage effectively. And so you've really got to start looking at synergy across your tools and your vendors to be able to do this efficiently and affordably. The other thing that I would recommend is, from a cybersecurity perspective, if you're looking for resources and partners, especially like in the medical world, banking has their experts. There are also experts in the medical world, and you're going to be better suited to work with somebody that works with the medical field versus seeking somebody, that, say, does CPAs and fintech, and now you're asking them to do, HIPAA compliance and overall security. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, human error. Hopefully this is not new news, but the vast majority of breaches come from human error. And everything I've highlighted here is primarily things that users, can affect negatively. So their behavior around working from home or working remotely, care of their devices, where they store files, how they share data, all of these types of things are behavioral things that lead, to incidents and events. There's a whole other set of behavior beyond your people, but also along the lines with your vendors and their people, and vendor management and behavior, around those types of things as well. Main thing is just to understand that people really are our number one security gap, and that workforce isn't really a force at all. It's kind of a giant ball of opportunity, for cyber criminals. So that said, um, here's our tech tip next, is that if you implement the controls to limit what people do, and you also train and test and train and test and train and test, the statistics show that the overall risk of human behavior falls off. We are people of routine, people of habit, and if things are consistently communicated to us over time, we begin to absorb that, internalize it, and apply it. When that starts to fade, our attention goes elsewhere. So there are technical controls that are affordable, cost effective, to limit human behavior risk, and then training, testing, being continuous and disciplined about that will improve and lower that human behavior risk. Okay, so let's go back to the definition here. That so many people running organizations, running medical practices, et cetera, are running with right now, is that it's too complex, it's too technical, it's too expensive. And so I want to dive deeper into this and kind of break it down. And if there's any questions as we go through some of these, please don't hesitate, to reach out. So let's go back to this diagram that we looked at earlier in the presentation. So too complex, too technical. The bottom line answer to it is you've got to take a team-based approach. So let's start up at the top with standards. It's 2021. HIPAA security rules, I think, were last updated in 2013. So not new news. These are free, they're readily available to you. Here's what the HIPAA security rules are. And there's lots of resources, again, free, readily available, to help you understand those things. The NIST cybersecurity framework, which I think came out in 2018 or something along those lines, and has been updated once since. But again, out there, available, free resource. So those two things for the medical world really provide the guiding standards, okay? And yes, you have to do a little bit of what they call crosswalking those standards, but not necessarily, a big undertaking. Insurance. Insurance, I think you guys have a presentation tomorrow from an insurance expert. But the insurance world is fundamentally about managing risk. That's how they make money. And so ultimately, they are rapidly working towards more and more standards to help their clients manage risk. And again, we'll make those readily available to you, because the better you are at managing risk, the better they are at making money. Policy, lots and lots of policies are out there. We provide these free, to our clients, to give you a good baseline of, the policies around it. And then, if you've got policy, what are the controls? And typically, if you're dealing with a vendor that deals with HIPAA and cybersecurity and compliance, They not only have a good set of policies, but they also have some controls to help you manage those policies. Okay. So bottom line, there's lots of standards, lots of resources, and they are largely free, but you've got to leverage, these groups and services that are out there. Managed IT and managed security will help you implement. And again, whether that is in-house or outsourced or co-managed, it really just depends on the size and the scope of your organization and the complexity and the risk that you're dealing with. The main thing I want to help you understand is that you cannot just be thinking traditional managed IT anymore. And the reason why is because the risks have changed, the problems have changed, the work has changed. You need people helping you also manage risk, not just technology and tools. And again, there are lots of companies, services, people out there with expertise in this area to help you implement it. Verification internally, honestly, there's lots of different ways to do this, and maybe during Q&A, if there's questions, I can help address some of that. And then externally, your insurance company is going to get more involved with this. They're not just going to write policies anymore without verification that you're doing some of the things to help manage risk. There's formal risk assessments, and those come in lots of flavors. There's pen tests, there's vulnerability tests, there's HIPAA security rule compliance testing. Reporting will help you verify, are we doing what we say we're doing? And then recovery, there's response, recovery tools, there's processes. The main thing that I want to encourage people here, and again, if there's questions about this during Q&A, is this has to be practical. It has to be useful. It can't be academic, if you will. And then insurance also is a tool to help organizations recover, not just from a technical standpoint, but across all stakeholders involved with an incident. Okay, so bottom line, you got to put together a team. And if your team currently is just, your traditional IT, it's going to be a struggle, just like it has been. Too expensive, important question here. The perception of it being too expensive is real, especially for those of us, with 150, 100 or less employees. And the fact is like many technologies, cybersecurity, managed security has really been in more of the medium business set. So the tools are priced for enterprise and for medium. The people are priced for enterprise and medium. So for many years, honestly, it has been too expensive. But what's happening is this is becoming a universal problem. And as the cyber criminals have moved more towards small and medium business, because the enterprise has already shored a lot of their gaps up, the tools have become more universal. They've become more cost effective. Certifications, universities, and so the workforce is certainly grown with cybersecurity, whereas before it was a very small set of people. It's a much larger set of resources now. So expense is coming down. Let's talk through some of the expense factors. So what drives expense? And this is true whether you have internal IT or external IT or a combination. The more endpoints and the more users, you're going to have greater expense. Okay, the more locations, and not just physical locations. Obviously, there's lots of work from home, remote work, flexible workers out there, working virtually, if you will. We have to be thinking now, these are locations. They're part of the new perimeter that we have to protect. The number of records and applications, let's take a school district in Montana that got breached. So they have what's called a school management system. And they had 2 school management systems. the old one, which they were keeping in production to access certain historical things, and the new one that they were using day to day. The more applications and really twice the records, they should have had more cybersecurity controls and thus more cybersecurity expense. What happened to them is they weren't protecting the legacy system and all the legacy records, and that got breached. And then off to the races they were. Standards alignment. This is a really, really important point. Not all organizations are equal. Okay, so let's just take a dental practice. We have dental practices, that maybe have, one patient room, and we have community health centers with a dental practice that might have 30. Okay, you're going to handle risk management differently, even though at the end of the day, both organizations are providing dental work. The one with more people, more endpoints, more users, more records is going to have to align with more security standards than the very small dental practice in rural Montana. Okay, so part of having a good cybersecurity practice is being able to not only look at the standards, but then also think practically what makes sense for us given our level of risk, given our percentage of risk, and manage accordingly. And then regulatory overhead. Obviously, medical folks do have regulatory overhead. We'll talk a little bit, more about that later. But not everyone manages regulatory overhead the same. And so, leaders have to make decisions on that front too. But the more you're going to align with it, the more expense associated. So hopefully that helps people understand what drives expense. And if there are areas where you can limit it, so maybe you have computers in, your practice that aren't in use anymore. If you reduce those, that's going to lower your cybersecurity risk and your cybersecurity expense. Simple example. Okay, diving a little deeper into too expensive. So over on the right-hand side, there was earlier in the presentation, one of the attendees, Betsy, I think, had said, Betty had said, what kind of are the list of things, that I have in place, just kind of my mental checklist. Okay, so over here on the right, you can see here's a checklist of stuff that is very common in the world of IT and traditional IT security. As I mentioned earlier, traditional IT is doing a fair amount of risk management. At this point, they really should be doing kind of the captain obvious types of things. And this is what I would say is a good captain obvious set of lists that most organizations should have in place. The main thing that I want to emphasize is, let's take backups as an example. You might say, I've got backups, but you need to continue to revisit that and be like, okay, how cyber fit are those? Can those really protect us from ransomware? Or is it just the same backups we've been doing, for the last decades? Because that has changed. But bottom line is that these types of things, as you look through them, are probably, most of you probably have an advanced firewall. Most of you probably have some advanced antivirus. Most of you have probably dealt with a VPN. So when you look at this stuff, getting this list of stuff will get you decent IT administration, infrastructure, the captain obvious security stuff, and a reasonable set of standards and compliance alignment. And you're probably, for a smaller organization, say less than 20 employees, be able to do this from a budget standpoint for somewhere between $30 and $50 per endpoint per month, with either internal IT or managed services. Okay, and that gets you pretty well in the ball game, as well as meet you into your operations. When you get into larger organizations, 50, 75, 100 employees or more, you have to be more comprehensive about even these set of services to make sure that gaps aren't opening up. And when you're doing that kind of ongoing tech steering, auditing, reviews, making sure things are up to snuff, that takes that $30 to $50 per endpoint per month and takes it up to $80 to $100 to stay on top of it. And it's just the simple fact that more people, more endpoints, more data records, all of that stuff drives more complexity and more expense. And when I say endpoint, I'm typically talking about how many PCs do you have? How many Macs do you have? How many servers do you have? That's what I mean by endpoints. Okay, so I don't think that's too expensive, for most medical practices in 2021. And certainly those prices have come down, from what they have been to be able to get these types of technologies. Let's look at some things that get you into advanced security and additional standards and compliance. So this is things like dark web monitoring, formalized security awareness training and testing, phish testing and reporting, true password management, DNS protection, what's called managed detection and response, which applies security policies, lines those up with the controls, advanced breach detection, security event logging, a much more scrutinized annual security gap audit. These are the things that organizations should be doing above and beyond if they're trying to really manage more modern types of risk. Okay, so when you think about this, advanced cybersecurity stuff, again, you might be thinking too expensive, but for a small organization, $20 to $30 per endpoint per month. And it actually drops off as you get larger because the cost can be spread out. And so you're down more into that $10 to $20, per user per month. But that, again, hopefully gives people a more up-to-date view on the expense associated, to achieve these types of things, regardless of your approach. It's good to ask the question too of too expensive when incidents happen. Okay, and so I got the little puppy dog. Accidents do happen. Incidents will happen, and part of me, does want to go back to simpler times. Where you could just go out in the forest. That's not realistic in today's modern landscape. We also can't afford, these gold super cybersecurity types of things that enterprises, invest in and embrace. And so you really do have to have, good quality facilities that allow your organization to adequately identify your risks, protect against those risks, be able to detect events and incidents, respond to events and incidents, and recover from events and incidents. And again, I want to bring this point home again of you can't just think about, the bathroom level stuff. You've got to be thinking cybersecurity at, supply chain, internet connectivity, third-party vendors, their tools, their technology, how that stuff, all fits together. That will help you move beyond traditional IT, to cybersecurity. Okay. Maybe I'll stop here for a second. Does everybody understand what I mean when the difference between an event and an incident? Is there anybody that would want to take a stab at answering what the difference is?
An event, something that's caught, and an incident is something that's not, and so they actually made it all the way through and there was a breach?
Not quite, Danny, but think of an event like normal things that happen. You need a new user. You hired a new employee. You need that person added to your IT system. That's a security event, because you need to be thinking about that event like, I have to manage that risk. I've got to get that employee with the right software, with the right credentials, with the right security tools. I can't just willy-nilly add them. So that's an event. An incident is more, look, something has happened that's bad, usually from a third party or an employee behavioral mistake or something that you have to respond to. So events, security events happen all the time. They're just part of normal business. You just have to have a security mindset. Is that helpful, Danny?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm embarrassed I was wrong.
Oh, just that was the point, Danny, of calling you out and see if I could embarrass you here. Okay. We're getting close to finishing up here and open up to Q&A, but I really do want people, as they attend this presentation, to think about, are you still acting like it's 2013? And the reason I chose 2013 is because that's the last time that the HIPAA security rules were updated. And that's a long time in the world of IT and in the world of cybersecurity. And so I'm asking you to think about this and fill in the blank. Is your leadership still acting like it's 2013? Your organization, your user behavior, your checkbook, maybe your IT department or your IT function, however that looks, or your IT service provider. The point is that if any of these things relative to cybersecurity are still acting like it's 2013, it's time to revisit. It's time to take action. It's not too complex. It's not too technical. It's not too expensive. Okay, so we've got smart people, myself, Meg Ross, who works in markets like the Bitterroot, Missoula, the Flathead, David Brennan, who works a lot within central Montana. We have clients across the state. So, there's our emails, there's our contact information. People are always welcome to pick up the phone, shoot an email, have a conversation. Our website, firstsolution.com, has good resources to help people better understand cybersecurity right now. We've got a big, long explanation. We've got case studies. We've got blog posts. We've got e-guides, that are helpful that you can download. And also on there, you can sign up for free executive level cybersecurity assessments. These are those things, again, get the leadership team together. Let's spend an hour, let's spend an hour and a half. Let's run through 50 questions. Let's get our heads, reframed around this thing better. Okay. So I'll be quiet. Are there questions at all from, anybody within the audience? And on topic or specific cybersecurity things that you've got, I'm happy to answer anything other than how I came up with the bathroom theme.
Connor, this is Danny. I'll take a stab at a first question here.
Sure.
I would have conflated before this webinar managed security and managed IT. And I think that our managed IT does some managed security, but what are the questions I go to them and ask to figure out, do they do that? Are they already doing that? And then if not, obviously then you or other companies are available to take that on, but how do I start to determine which is the services that they provide?
Yeah, so one of the things is, you can go through that checklist of things, right? And say, okay, what of these things are you doing for us? What of these things are you doing for us? Okay. Other good questions to ask is, how does your company protect itself? What regulations are you following? How are you verifying that cybersecurity is being done for your company? they have the same problem that you have, right? I have the same problem that you have, right? I have to apply good standards to my company to avoid risk for my company as well as all the clients I serve. There's things we have to implement. So you can ask those questions to get an idea of, well, what are you doing for yourself to help better understand, well, then what could you do for me above and beyond maybe what you're doing for us traditionally? What standards do you follow? What additional tools and services do you have in place? How do you verify that stuff? Do you get a pen test? Do you do a third-party vulnerability test? So having those types of discussions, can help. You can also ask, did they do cybersecurity assessments? Beyond the traditional things that they're doing. Okay, many companies honestly would appreciate your understanding that, hey, we've worked together for a long time and the relationship is good, but just even having your client understand, I realize you're probably doing some Captain Obvious stuff for me and that you're not doing advanced security. So could we have that discussion to see what's available? A vendor would appreciate that discussion because oftentimes customers just assume, well, you're doing everything for me, right? And that's usually not the case. Does that help, Danny?
Yeah, absolutely, because I recognize a few of the things on the more advanced list, but I don't know about all of them. But also, I only know enough about our system to know that I should be scared. So it's helpful to, I think to have them maybe walk through that list with me and say, yes, we are doing that. You just aren't aware of it, or yes, what you call this is actually this thing that's on the list, or no, we're not doing these 3 or 4 things, and you might want to add that or find somebody that can.
Right. And at a minimum, revisit this question about backups. Because if you, come back to this shot here, right? Maybe you're not doing great with standards alignment and implementing managed security and managed IT, and verifying, it's like, not on my radar either. If nothing else, you've got to make sure that your backups are cyber fit and can deal with the most common threats like ransomware, and that you've got that piece pegged. So that would be a minimal question that I would circle back to your vendors on. But again, not the strategy I would take, but at a minimum, you've got to make sure that just for pure business continuity. Okay. Other questions at all? All right, well, we'll close up. Again, here's that last slide, links to our website. I know you guys have a presentation tomorrow on cyber insurance. So just what's happening in that industry is that cyber insurance is becoming very unprofitable for that industry. When they originally started selling policies, not that many incidents were happening. And so it was a good cash cow. Now, lots and lots of incidents are happening across lots and lots of industries. So what's happening is, again, they're losing money on it. And when they start losing money, they start having much, much tighter, tougher scrutiny on applications for new policies, as well as claims on existing policies. I would not be surprised if certain industries might be excluded in mass from the insurance industry for a while. And honestly, medical could be one of them because medical has been extremely hard hit. If nothing else, they will reduce coverages if they don't exclude all coverages. Certainly, you will see higher premiums and deductibles. The math just says that's going to be the case. Hopefully, part of all of this is that companies will start to do more things so that they can get insurance and lower their premiums and deductibles, which should drive less risk for everybody. You know, another big impact is this whole SolarWinds thing, which certainly the insurance industry is watching very, very closely, because that is a category 5 if you think about like mass destruction to a community, say like New Orleans, where one big storm hurt lots and lots of companies and obviously lots of claims against insurance. SolarWinds is that kind of thing in the cybersecurity world, where it literally could bankrupt certain insurance companies. So that's kind of what's going on there. And then I'll close with this. We all know, if we're in your guys' seat, of HIPAA risk analysis and compliance reports. And here's something I just copy pasted from the internet. There's more than 700,000 organizations that should be doing this, okay? In the past, when we thought about compliance reporting, we were thinking about, I need to check that box. I don't want to get audited. I don't want to get fined. And then you would decide, do I want to hassle with it or not? Because your big risk then was I'd get audited, I'd get fined. And that risk was pretty low. And that's how most people in your guys' seat have been thinking about it since 2013. I would really encourage everyone to be thinking about HIPAA risk analysis and compliance reporting, not on checking the box, but on really figuring out your risks. And the why to do that should be clear to us now. It is, the risks have gone up dramatically. And if that helps you identify risks and close the gaps, it's well worth the exercise. You know, change your why and you may change your view on doing these. So anyway, I really appreciate the time. Few other resources out there you can click on. And then I said this, I wanted to close, you know, by bringing some humor to this, bringing some smiles. It's been a long year. Thank you to the medical community and for all the people that support them. Let's smile on the way out of this presentation. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Conor. We really appreciate your presentation today on behalf of Montana MGMA. To continue your theme, cybersecurity scares the crap out of me. I think it is that your last point is great in that when I first started, it was kind of a box checking thing. And as I learned more, I became more concerned about it. And that's why we're really trying to take steps to educate ourselves and to educate our members so that we're making sure that we're proactive before we're the next headline in the newspaper. And I know there have been a couple practices in Montana and a few in Wyoming that have been hit that I'm aware of, and I'm sure Steve tomorrow will share more because he insures most of a couple of the states here in the West. So this isn't some big, health system in, some big city far away kind of a thing, that this is in our backyard now. So this was really great, and I very much appreciate the information. Please do reach out to Conor. You have his contact information, and we'll make sure we share it out with a link after the webinar today. But reach out with questions. They are a great resource. And if you don't have the help you need, certainly that they'd be a great place to start to figure out how to start protecting your practices better. I also want to put in a plug for tomorrow's part 2. Today was kind of the front end. How do we prevent things from happening? Tomorrow's is the back end. What happens when you do have a breach? And then what kind of insurance do you need? Because these are very expensive. And so how do you protect your practice and make sure that you're able to recover not only your data, but that you don't sink yourself financially? So Steve was on the presentation today and will be able to help see if some of Conor's predictions as far as insurance actually are coming true. But please do join us tomorrow for part 2. And then a special thanks overall to UMIA for sponsoring this series. They've been great partners and they are experts in this just as much as First Call Solutions is. So thank you all for attending, and we'll send out a link with contact information and a chance for you to look at the slides and pull some of those checklists from this after the session.
Thanks,
Have a good
Kenny.
afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.